Her and I are good friends after the podcast. Yeah. I
Oh
hear her voice
yeah,
all the time.
the electronic lady. That's what
I'll tell
even I call
Siri.
Alexa. All right. So hello, hey guys. So I have Jacob here from the Wisdom of Odin. He has been on YouTube. How long have you been on YouTube now?
It'll be 2 years, August 19th, I believe.
I was gonna say, I thought we're coming up on year 2, I think. And it's just been funny to like watch you grow and stuff. But yeah, I have been loving his channel and I wanted to have him come on so we could talk about Norse paganism. So here he is. Hi, Jacob.
Hello.
Thank you for being on.
No, thank you for sending me down memory lane right away, because now I'm thinking about my first episodes and I'm like, oh my gosh, people still watch those, don't they?
Right? Yeah. It's kind of wild. So I just figured that we could kind of start into maybe talking about how you got on the path and maybe even a little bit of your YouTube journey.
I don't know what's happening with the sun right now. Hold on.
Just saying hello.
Yeah, aggressively saying hello.
I have the morning light. You have the evening light. It's all working.
It's the same sun, I think. Nope.
Maybe. Yours is a little more aggressive than mine.
This is a German sun for sure. Like it's had a lot of sauerkraut. Like, do I need to like wait, hold on. Boom. Nah.
No. Maybe.
Oh, there we go. I literally just have like my cleaning cloth like shadowing the lens.
My head is blocking most of it up here. So.
Yeah. Yeah, no, like the moment oh my gosh, yeah, it is so bright right now. Anyways, yes, hello paganism. That's what we're talking about. the sun, paganism. Yeah.
That's part of it.
Yeah. So if you had a first question, I don't remember it now because I was busy readjusting things.
So I figured that we could just start with kind of how you came on your journey into Norse paganism and kind of take us down that road a little bit.
Yeah. So recently, this is not a promotion by any means because there is nothing really to promote, but I've started to kind of write down my ideas into some form of book form. The only people I've shared it with is just like on Patreon. Like I shared like the first 6 pages, I think it was. And really it was just me writing down my journey and kind of deciding what lens and what voice I wanted to do for that. And the voice I ended up with was this kind of weird, like country American, like almost like Matthew McConaughey inner monologue. Okay. That's what I ended up with. Because I think what makes my story so interesting, and I even write that in there in this word vomit, is that I am not special in any way. I had a very normal, boring, safe, nothing exciting childhood. I don't have anything I can say like, oh, please feel sorry for me. Like, no, my life was normal. It was fine. It was just boring. And I think, I went to boring church like anybody else. I mean, I went to church literally from the day I was born until I was probably 17 when I finally decided not to go anymore. And yeah, it was just one of those things where I never felt God. I never felt the calling. I always remember my mom was saying like, oh, when one day you'll feel the calling of God. And I think the only thing I ever felt was anxiety and fear, because it was like the only thing that would make me want to go up there was not disappointing my mother. And I think that's true of so many people on this path. I mean, it seems like we're in this pagan revolution of people in their 20s. And I think it is because a lot of us come from this era where we went to church and that was just our lives. And church has become this weird, especially being here in Germany at the moment, church used to have some form of a soul. And I think Catholicism is, while it has its many corruptions, at least has something. They left behind all the history they had when the Protestant, people came over to the United States. And so that's what most of us in the United States follow. And there's just something missing, just a history, some roots, something. And I just never felt it. And, I went into college, relatively the same mindset. I was just a boring guy going to be an artist. I thought being an artist would make me money, and was so very sorely mistaken, especially as a painter. So I ended up finding video work and photography ended up being my main medium. And then paganism kind of came after that and kind of interwoven with my life through it all. just because I got interested. I started reading history books and things like that. I got my minors in art history. I have a love for art history. I have a love for world religions, and especially like Shintoism. I took a lot of Japanese history classes, and I love
I have a soft spot for Shinto.
Yeah. Especially like animism, like the god and everything. And so, but Shintoism never really felt like my thing. It's like, well, it'd be weird if I was like, I'm Shinto, just because I took a tea class one time. And so I started like, okay, what's the Shintoism I can kind of follow? And I kind of wound my way up to the north. I wound my way up into northern spirituality. I started reading some really old documents on Odin and Thor, and how it compared the gods of the north to the gods of the south and how different they were. And before too long, I started this curiosity turned into a full-blown religious experience. I just found myself, I've said this a billion times, but working in a restaurant, and then all of a sudden I had a moment with Odin, and just like boom, religious experience in the middle of serving tables. And so I think that's what makes my story interesting, is the fact that I was just trying to live a normal, boring life that no one would ever remember, and all of a sudden I met these gods. And that's the roller coaster of my life now, as we mentioned, 2 years of the Wisdom of Odin. Again, sitting in Germany right now, all things I never expected that first time between booth 24 and 25 when I had my first experience.
Odin comes in and is like, sit down, boy.
Yeah, no, really. Can I drop off this Eggs Benedict first, please?
I think it's so interesting that you're talking about writing this book, and how your life has come from just pretty mediocre, I guess we could say, and that's actually relatable to a lot of people. And I think that's one thing that I think you'll find other people will get a lot of comfort in. I know that there are so many of us that have been brought up in a religious household or brought up in the church. I myself haven't, but I did have a small stint with that, where it was enough for me to be like, that just doesn't fit right. But I also really love the fact that it was art that sort of took you curving towards the path of paganism. And I find that fascinating, art and history, just kind of learning who we are and where we came from. But to me also, I see art as very spiritual, and it's just either it's an expression of yourself, or it's an expression of how you see the world. And how we both have ended up seeing the world is through a pagan lens. So to me, that's very fascinating. So what brought you to making the Wisdom of Odin?
So I guess I was really looking for, I never started it, thinking this would be my full-time job, never thinking that it was going to be something that lasted 2 years. Because I guess I saw there was this vacuum in the, Norse pagan YouTuber sphere, because, everyone knew Crawford. Everyone watching this video knows who Jackson Crawford is. But anytime you found a video where he talks about the religion, he's like, I don't really follow it. It's not really my thing. So it's a very dry, methodical knowledge base, which is great for certain things. Like when you want the knowledge, when you want the history, his channel's great. And I've watched countless of his videos. But and then I would find some pagan YouTubers, Norse pagan YouTubers, and they would talk about their practice all the time. They talk about offerings, they talk about speaking with the gods, but no one ever showed it. I couldn't find one YouTube channel where someone actually showed me how to give an offering to the gods. And so that's really what my channel was. And that's why I set out to make it, is I wanted to actually, I was like, throw all caution to wind. Like, I understand why people don't show their practice, because it's a private thing. But I was like, what, that's what's going to set me apart. That's what's going to make me different. And that's what, I want to show people, is I'm discovering this faith, really for the first time. I really wanted to dive deeper into it, and I wanted to take everyone along with me. And so, you watch me, I think the greatest compliment I ever get, and the thing I love seeing, is when people message me or comment and they say, hey, I watched your newest video. Now I'm going to go back to episode 1 and see how much it's changed. And, I've literally watched them, I'll wake up one morning, I'll see comments, and they're literally going through every video, and they're like, I'm at halfway point now. And I'm like, oh my gosh, you're watching literally all of these. Okay. But it's also a good point to reflect for me, because, like my earlier videos, I don't know what I'm doing. There's certain times I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I said, like, I remember I used to be like, when you give a sacrifice to the gods and things like that. And it was just like, that was the language I knew, was, giving sacrifice, but I'm sitting here pouring like a bottle of, liquor out. And of course, now I say offerings and things like that. And, obviously, making historical mistakes and inaccuracies and eventually learning from it. The channel itself is more or less a diary of my own personal growth. So not only do I find it useful for myself to go back and see, wow, how much have I changed? But I think it's great for people to actually look back and see how much, I've learned along the way as well, but also how much has stayed true. I think my third episode was the 3 pillars of paganism. And I talk about how, to me, the most important parts of Norse paganism, and really any paganism, is the gods you follow, the folk you kind of surround yourself with, and the ancestors and things like that. The spirit of community, and spirits like land spirits, elves, gnomes, whatever you want to, fae, whatever you want to say. Ooh, sorry, the tea got me there. You can leave that in. I just leave burps in at this point. So yeah, those are the most important things to me. And I've always said, as long as I can put those 3 things above myself, I feel like I'm following the path correctly. And that is still how I feel to this day. Something that I attached to so early is still the backbone of basically every single video. And I mean, really the backbone of the community as well. So yeah, I mean, it's crazy how much has changed, but I'm proud of what hasn't.
Yeah. I think I have been watching you, I think probably for a good year and a half.
I feel like I think you were like 550 subscribers. I feel like is when I first saw you pop up.
Yeah. I found you through Make Hella. She did an interview with you. And I just remember when I was checking out your channel and stuff, I was like, I just love how much you invite everybody into your practice. And being a visual person myself, I would have loved that when I started out. I mean, when I started out, all I had was books and books and books, which obviously there's no issue with that, of course, but it just, sometimes it's nice to actually sit there and see, how do you give an offering? Or more than anything, I think one of the things that I really enjoy about your channel is the fact that you're always out in nature. Like it just makes me happy to see someone sitting out in nature doing that. And I wish that I did it more when it comes to recording, but having 2 young kids, that's not always
have them run around in the background, just like, I don't know what kids play with these days. Just like throw some Legos in the middle of the field and just like let them go crazy.
They would be immediately attracted to the camera and like sticking their faces in. But it's been really fun to watch you grow, and I can see where your niche and talent is when it comes to cinematography as well. I really kind of enjoyed watching that bloom too. I just bumped the mic. I can definitely tell, like, I loved when you got a drone and then you kind of started filming the gatherings and stuff too with that.
And then I crashed the drone and I haven't used the drone since then.
Why?
Oh, well, not why. It's those things are attracted to danger.
Yeah, they are. My husband wants one.
Yeah, well, make sure get the insurance. Trust me.
He wants to take it up to Lake Superior and fly it over the cliffs on the North Shore and stuff. And I'm like, ugh, a lot of money to be floating that far up. But now I know that you had said that you had said at some point that Odin kind of had come to you and told you to gather the folk, and you certainly have. I mean, there are gatherings, I think, globally now from that.
I haven't had that international gathering yet.
Really?
The old Rona is keeping us from doing that effectively.
Okay.
Basically, every time one gets planted, like we have a date, they're looking at a location, all of a sudden new stuff comes out, new regulations come out, and all of a sudden they can't do it. We've been lucky enough that in the United States, in particular Kentucky, where we've had majority of the first year of gatherings, like restrictions were fairly light, so we really didn't have any problems. But yeah, I mean, like in the UK in particular has been, I mean, it's been almost impossible to get anything going over there. Yeah,
it's kind of, I mean, there's been a lot going on over there that's been a little wild with going in and out of lockdowns and stuff. But
well, I didn't there's so many people in the UK. Like I literally looking up, it's like over 30 million people all crammed in that little island like the size of Ohio. Like, it's crazy.
It is really wild. I haven't had the privilege yet, but I'd love to go sometime. I especially want to go explore Scandinavia just because, my grandfather was Swedish, like full-blood Swedish, and so he would talk about it all the time, and he used to have this big coffee table book, and I just remember looking through it, and I think that's, for me, that's kind of where like my roots in paganism started. But I don't know. I can personally trace it back to when I was a kid for how it started for me. But I I just think it's crazy you guys haven't had a gathering yet there. But I think the other thing that I was going to bring up when it comes to gatherings is you had your first one kind of right when COVID was kind of coming head to head. And it's been wild to see you guys persevere even through all of that. And we've had one hell of a year, and it's been refreshing to see you post about these gatherings. And I know that there's been safety concerns and stuff, but we're all free to make our own choices and do what we need to do. So
yeah. No, I mean, I think, just like with anything, the story is really, I mean, what, sells the whole thing. I mean, or really just, tells its own story, because, we had the first gathering. It was 24 hours. Like, it wasn't like the 3-day, 4-day ones we have nowadays. It was 24 hours. It was one night. And it was about, I think, 9 days before Kentucky went on full lockdown. And so obviously right afterwards, we had a crazy, great experience, best 24 hours of my life at that point. And, we went through the, first phase of lockdowns. I think in total, I was out of work about 6 weeks. And then it wasn't until the end of May that year that, things started lightening up. And then the questions started getting asked, because obviously I put up that first video and so many people were beginning to ask, like, hey, when's the next one? And, we had that conversation where, like, do we want to continue to do this? Like, obviously we know what's going on in the world. And it was just, there were so many people that wanted this to happen. We were like, we got to do it. And so we literally planned the Midsummer Gathering in 20 days. Like, I mean, literally it was like the 1st of June and we were like, I guess we're doing this. And then somehow we managed to make it happen. And then just every single one, we posted the Midsummer video, we had the Midsummer Gathering, and then all of a sudden more and more people were like, when's the next one? When's the next one? Until now, and that's kind of how it was all the way up through Yule. And now this year is when it's kind of blown up. I mean, we went from having, I think, 5 gatherings last year. And so far this year, we've had 14.
That's remarkable.
Including one nearby to you didn't get to go to. And I'm so sorry for it.
I know. There's actually been 2 that have happened close by to me, but hopefully I'm going to try and make it to the fall one. So we'll see how that goes. And I think, honestly, as pagans, it is so much harder for us to find community. We don't have churches everywhere. I mean, God, there's like 3 within half a mile from me right now. So we don't have that. And, while, we often say that nature is our church, and as well it should be, it is nice to go out and be among like-minded people. There's a power to that. And I think that it's not to be underestimated. Obviously, it has a dark side as well, of course, but I do think it is important to seek community and to feel like you'd have a place where you belong, where you can bounce ideas off of each other and have those conversations where you feel inspired, or you might be trying to understand an aspect of your spirituality and you have other people to stand there and support you. Having that support is tremendous, and it really does mean quite a bit, I'm sure. And I think it means a lot to many people who have taken part in this.
Yeah, I mean,
incredible.
Even like I think there's 2 sides of the gatherings. There's actually being in one, and obviously honestly, we're addicted to them at this point. I haven't had one this summer because I'm here in Germany, and I felt like the withdrawals, like I was getting the itches that I needed to go to a gathering, because I had been doing them every 3 months, if not every month at this point. And it's the fact, and it's not something you realize you miss until you don't have it anymore. Especially for someone that's been doing this now, is being able to go out into the woods, have an experience like, wow, I feel the trees, I feel the energy, I've dug my fingers into the earth. I can go tell someone about it. You run back to the house, you find someone, you're like, can I talk about the trees? And they're like, can I talk about the rocks? And then you sit there and you talk about trees and rocks for like an hour and a half. And the fact that they, don't only just listen to you, but they actually care about what you're saying. And they actually are like, oh my gosh, yeah, like the rocks are crazy, man. Like, I remember we had a gathering back in the spring, and someone that like was just like having some kind of ancestor experience with the water. Like, he had his hands in the water, and then afterwards he's just like, we need to talk about this water. I'm like, I need to talk about that tree. So like, we just sat down and talked about it. And so not having that, and I think that's something that, when you get into this path the first time and you have those experiences, I mean, it's still why most of the questions I get today are people like, hey, is this a sign from the gods? What is this sensation? What should I feel? Because they don't have anyone else to bounce these ideas off of.
Mm-hmm.
but a gathering gives them a place to bounce those things off of other people. And not only that, but, you know, when you do have something that makes you feel crazy, you know, you get that justification to be like, okay, maybe that was a little crazy, or that is actually how I should be feeling. So we need that as people to, you know, make sure that we're not, you know, we're our own, I guess, our own checks and balances, I guess, is our own thing to our own spiritual experiences. You have to have a community to keep things grounded.
Yep, you do. I also feel like in the particular case of paganism's been so stigmatized that we kind of go to that place of, am I nuts, quicker than I think we would if we were sitting in a church, you know. At least I do. And it took me a long time to really kind of shift past that, and to the point where I'm starting to understand that paganism is just different, and it's not going to be the same as Christianity. And I personally did a whole video on like male personified deity, because I had resisted it for so long, fearing that it would be just as the Abrahamic God and that I would feel uncomfortable. But then Odin was like, no, we need to talk, girl.
Yeah.
So, and I'm grateful to it, because my experiences with Odin has been so much different than any experience that I didn't have any experiences with the Abrahamic God. I just felt like it wasn't right, like it didn't fit. And, you know, having to look at it, remove myself from that preconceived notion of it's supposed to be this way, because I put myself in this box that society puts us in with when it comes to how we're supposed to view religion. And I think a lot of people really get caught up in that when they're stepping into paganism as well. We really kind of think it's supposed to be like Christianity, but different at the same time. And I know you've talked about that a little bit on your channel too, and on the podcast, which I had greatly enjoyed every time you brought that up, because that's something that's really been in the forefront of my brain as well. And me personally, I've been a practicing pagan for 20 years, and it still took me a while to get to that point where I had to realize it's different.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, like you said, I'm glad you listened to the podcast. The podcast is actually something I feel like a lot of people don't realize that I do, because I have so many like I love the conversations we have on the podcast. Because I honestly, that is something.
Stitches too sometimes.
Oh yeah. The inside jokes now are getting pretty in depth. But like, I feel like, one of the things we actually did discover, like, I feel like we had a conversation after we recorded one day where we were talking about people are always looking for that Christian equivalent in any religion, really, especially Norse paganism, because that's where most people's background comes from. And even if it's not them actually practicing Christianity as like, growing up in families. But that's just our knowledge base. You know, most of our movies from the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s are very Christian influences. You know, they went to Christmas, you know, they went to church, and it's like something you don't necessarily notice until you actually start searching for it. But there's so many little Christian themes in basically every part of our media. So you start looking for those things in Norse paganism. And, and I mean, honestly, there's so many ideas, like the 9 noble virtues. This is something I see all the time, is people are always talking about these. And it's like, you realize those were literally made to be to the 10 commandments, basically. Like, someone sat down at one point. Yeah. Like, well, and not to mention that, like, if you look up actually who made them, you're like, woo, like, it was like the leader of like the fascist party in England in 1930 came up with that stuff. And it's just like, so not only does it not come from a good person in a good place, it comes from like the bad idea, because really in the 1930s, heathenry was going through this massive, it was getting popular, but not for the right reasons. And then really it was getting infused with Christianity, because it was trying to be basically take the place of Christianity, because there was a power vacuum at that time. And so their sermon, everything became Christian oriented, sermons, pastors, 9 noble virtues, prayer and things like that. So a lot of those influences we still see today in a lot of heathen groups came from a Christian background. And so you have to fight through that layer where there's actually things that have been put into place. You have to fight through your own need to want a single deity through sin. Like, that's a big one. Is I feel like a lot of people feel like they anger the gods, or they do something that gives them some form of heathen sin. And it's like, we really don't have that.
No. I caught myself a few times feeling that way as well, but it was pretty rare, but I will tell you that it was still there, where I was just like, God, I haven't sat at my altar in like a week and a half. I'm sure Freya's just pissed at me.
Yeah.
Then I go and sit down, and I just feel this loving presence of like, hey, how you been? Good to see you. Like,
and I think it's always the oh, you left, you went somewhere, like, oh, okay.
they have things to do. I mean, they can't sit there and constantly check in on us. But I think that our whole concept of trying to remove ourselves from those preconceived notions of Christianity, that really muddles our experiences with trying to decipher the messages of the gods. And so I kind of wanted to talk about that a little bit, where what are the key experiences you've had where you've been like, okay, yeah, that's definitely one. And what are some of the ones where you're just like, I don't know, I'm going to have to think about that.
Yeah, so expect this question to come back around to you, of course, as well.
I'm ready.
yeah, you got time now. So first off, something you kind of touched on there is like what systems, what processes do you go to kind of go through these things. And I think this is, carrying from the previous conversation, is just, understanding the Christian layer, like basically take everything that's happened in the last 200 years and kind of like scoot that aside and then look at the history, like ancient histories, look at the Poetic and Prose Edda, look at, what artifacts we have, what other sagas we have that backbone of knowledge always back in there. It's not the faith itself. Like we don't have a Bible that's not, 100% this faith. It can't be. And then you take your own experiences and others and mash those together and see what happens, or filtering lenses, whatever metaphor you want to use. And that's something I always do. It's like, I'm trying to think of something recently. The other day I was at a graveyard and a red squirrel came out and just stared at me. And I'm like, what is happening here? And then through the powers of squirrel speech, the squirrel seemed to like communicate. And, it was like this weird, small religious experience with this squirrel. But I took that knowledge I have of like Ratatosker, like this, really not written about thing much, English.
It works.
So, Ratatosker, we know that someone at some point was looking at a squirrel and thinking that is impressive enough to write a story about it and to tell a story around a fire that was originally, eventually written down to the point we know today there was a mythological being that was a squirrel. And so I look at this squirrel now and I'm like, okay, what made people think that you ran up and down the world tree and delivered news? One, it's probably because they'd never shut up. And they're always chattering up and down as the trees. And so I think it's
in the tree and yell at you.
Yeah, they just sit in the tree and yell at you, and then they can throw things at you too. So they're quite mischievous. But also, they're one of the beings that we can't. They exist in the ground and the roots, and also at the top of the trees. So, I don't know if I had like this incredible religious experience, but I think I understood squirrels more, and I understood the purpose of Ratatosker and how the ancestors viewed him. So I don't know. That's like the experiences I have at this point is like these really mundane, small things. But again, if I didn't have that one line from I think it's the Voluspa talking about Ratatosker, I wouldn't have maybe had this spiritual experience with a squirrel, So I don't know. Right. Maybe that's not the best experience, but that's one I've had recently for sure.
I think the way that I see that though is essentially you're sitting there, you're analyzing the situation, and the knowledge and the connection that you have with the gods is what's helping you change your perspective on that.
Oh yeah.
I mean, that's just how I see it, but.
All right. Now, same question to you, because I'll do my squirrel story because I don't know if that's the best one I could pull it out.
Well, most of my experiences with the gods have actually been through a lot of synchronicities or dreams or psychic messages, if you will, honestly. Most of them have been around death, really. For instance, communication with loved ones and stuff, or even through meditations, or sometimes through experiences with animals, but more so having that sort of link to the other side. And so my most interesting experience with Odin started with him just kind of coming into my life through a dream. But then you take that into contrast of Freya, who I ended up working with the most, and she's the only deity I've dedicated myself to. After 5 years of working with her, I finally was like, yeah, I think we'll do that thing that I've never done. And really with her, all it was is all of a sudden I was just drawn to her. I wanted to learn about her. And so I started studying about her. And then I was trying to get pregnant with my second son. So I had done a spell where I called upon her for fertility, and I got pregnant in a month, basically. And then my connection to the Norse gods in particular, grew and grew as I was pregnant with him. So much that I named him Arthur, but it's spelled Arthor.
Arthur.
Yes. So it's kind of a little nod to that, and a little nod to both my heritage and my husband's. But it's interesting because the reason why I'm sharing this is because my experience with Freya and having her start out coming into my life, it wasn't like clouds parting, all this crazy stuff happening. It was very subtle. And it just suddenly she just kept popping up in my head. And I just needed to start reading about her stories. And then I ended up having the deepest connection with her versus Odin, who basically gave me a dream and, came in with a different, a completely different experience. And every one of my experiences with these deities coming into my lives have been different in their own ways. And I think that's fascinating too. I don't know if you've had those experiences too, where it's just one is different than the other, but it's still unmistakable. But
so what I've been thinking of while you're telling the story, which I mean is not going to be nowhere near as good as yours because yours led to the birth of your son. But so mine was actually Freya. So the first time I had a Freya experience myself, and I was kind of the opposite of you. I was working so much with Odin and the masculine deities. I really had never opened up myself to the feminine deities. But Freya decided to go ahead and just say, well, you're going to open up. And, basically, I just had this crazy experience that I didn't expect. And I think that's what made it real to me, is that I wasn't seeking it. Like I was in downtown Lexington where I live, and I went to college there as well at the university. And I was just sitting in my car downtown, and I looked to my left, and there was a girl I went to college with. She was just in one of my classes. And, for some reason, I just noticed her, and I was like, I should go to the campus. I haven't been there in a year or so I'll just go drive on campus real quick. And so I, whip around my car, park on campus. And as soon as I get on walking up the main street, I look to my left and I see this like, oh, hey, another squirrel story. I see this cute little squirrel sitting in the middle of the field. And I'm like, oh, that's adorable. And then I hear like a screech of like a hawk. And I was like, and then all of a sudden it swoops up and snatches up the squirrel and like carries it into a tree. And I'm like, well, that was pretty crazy, because like University of Kentucky is in the middle of downtown. So there is just a hawk that just grabbed a squirrel on the University of Kentucky campus. This is pretty crazy. And, and I was reminded to go there by a woman, saw a hawk, and I was like, is there like a Freya thing going on right now? This is interesting. And then like I felt called like in myself to go to this like lotus pond that they have there. And sure enough, as soon as I get there, I realize that this is the exact time of year that the lotuses actually bloom. Like there's only like, I think it's like 3 or 4 weeks where they actually bloom. And the fact that I just so happened to come to the spot in the exact moment where they were finally starting to come out. And then there was also honeybees there, which, to me are a very Freya thing because of the queen bee kind of thing. They also very protective, but yet makes anything beautiful. And, are involved with flowers. And then I just sat there and I just called out to Freya for the first time. And it was almost like an immediate connection where it was just like, oh, it took you that long to realize it was me kind of thing. And I just sat there in like a meditation for, probably 30, 40 minutes. And like right away, I like, kind of like saw her face, and it felt this like kind of loving embrace, but also like reflecting on all the things I had seen, like the hawk, that predator, the honeybees, the lotuses, the beauty. So to me, everything usually does come from the natural world. But I think when I realize the thing that I think makes signs is when you don't expect them. If you're constantly looking for them, like if I was out all the time, like, oh, I want a sign from Freya, please. I would look at every flower, every honeybee, every hawk, and every woman on the street is a sign from Freya. But for some reason in that day, that one woman, that, that one bird, that, those honeybees and those flowers, all fit together perfectly into an experience. And, I can't deny it. So I would say if anyone's, on this path or struggling and you really want a sign, is just stop looking for them. They'll eventually find their way to you. And they're going to be way more worthwhile if you're just patient and just, keep an open mind, but yeah, don't look for every sign and every bird you see.
I think for me, it's normally when a sign happens, it's like that where I'm not looking for it, but it's also kind of a building blocks of synchronicities, much like you just described, where they lead you to something and then it dawns on you and you kind of have that feeling inside you where you're just like, okay, hi, I hear you now. And I think
you lost the sun.
that see, now it's not trying to blind you.
I know, right?
Mine's very much still. But I think you're very right. I think we seek validation when we are stepping into this path. And I know I certainly did. And I was a teenager when I started. So I was definitely seeking validation for sure.
Like, we seek validation for everything.
Right. We really do.
Yeah.
And I think that sometimes just slowing down and not expecting things is really when you'll start to kind of be whipped around that rapid, or something all of a sudden will just, my experience with Freya was during a time when I had been working with some Celtic deities for a few years prior, and then suddenly they just went silent. They went dark. And I was like, okay, what's happening? Like, this is weird. I feel very alone. And then my life was really kind of busy with all the other mundane stuff and caring for a toddler and, trying to get pregnant with another child and all this other stuff. And so my spirituality took a little bit of a back burner and it just wasn't in my head for a bit. And then all of a sudden there's Freya. It's interesting. So the other thing that no,
go ahead. No, you please go ahead. I was interrupting you.
I was going to shift to another topic. So if you have something to add, go ahead.
No, I think, I'll try to think of it quickly is, oh shoot, if I don't even remember it now. Oh yeah, no, I was just going to use a metaphor because I love them. So something I always see when people get into this path for the first time is exactly the same thing we do as a child. Is we want to rush to the end. We want to rush to that next big thing. I remember as a child thinking, I can't wait to be 16 so I can drive. I can't wait to be 18 so I can move out, and then as soon as I hit 16, I'm like, driving sucks. And then as soon as I hit 18, I'm like, now I'm poor, So, and I feel like it's the same thing with the spirituality. Even if you're getting into it, at an older age, you come into it with a child mindset, you're excited. You're like, wow, look at all this stuff I can do. I'm having all these crazy experiences. I can't wait to have an Odin experience. I can't wait to have my first near death spiritual explosion shaman thing. I can't wait to talk to, Fenrir. And you're like, whoa, now I'm sitting here like, whoa, calm down, kids. Like, it's okay. Just let it all come, because we all know as adults that we want to go back in time and tell our younger selves, don't grow up, enjoy it while it lasts. So enjoy the beginning stages. The first few years, months of paganism are great because every new experience you're like, whoa, your mind is blown, and then, you really do have to eventually settle into, this is a lifelong path. And, things don't happen every single day. And they eventually just become your life. And that is honestly the greatest gift, though, is being able to say, I can look at a tree and I feel connected to it. It's not the thing anymore, but it's life. And that is much more satisfying.
Right. I'm going to jump into the other thing, but I just kind of want to piggyback a little bit. See, and I think that for me, sometimes you'll have moments where you'll be revitalized too. For instance, I grew up in Washington State, but I live here in Minnesota now. And a few years ago, we went camping in the North Cascades. And that place is sacred to me. I've been there so many times and I just love it so dearly, but it had been a good while, over a decade since I had last been there. Hiking through those trees, I just felt that moment. Like, I just felt like I was starting to come alive again and have another just amazing experience of just feeling everything around me. And I think that while you do kind of settle into a comfort zone with paganism, you will still have those experiences where things will kind of make you come alive or your spark, but also you will have downtime. You will have times where you don't feel anything for months, or you don't feel inspired, or you don't want to practice. And that's okay too. I think that's something that I wish that we would talk about a little bit more, is when you kind of go through a spiritual slump, because it does happen more often than you going through the like, yay moments.
Yeah. Well, I definitely want you to go into the next topic. So the only thing I'll say is learn to enjoy the mundane, find peace in the fact that you don't have these crazy experiences all the time. And to me, that is the ultimate, key to happiness, is learning how to enjoy the vast amount of time in between the big story moments.
Yeah, I struggle with that tremendously, especially still being, the mother of young children and stuff too. But the thing that I wanted to bring about.
1 second, I want to make sure. So yeah, I just had to yell at some kids in the street, because I told you. I just know this mic can pick up anything. So I was
right. Yeah, I use a program that actually helps drown out back noise. So
good.
I feel you. Otherwise, you'd be hearing my kids.
Oh yeah.
So the interesting thing that kind of differs your path from mine is that I practice witchcraft, whereas I know that you are just practicing pagan. And so I just find that interesting, where I don't know if that's really talked about a whole lot too, the differences between the two or how they blend together. And I just was wondering what your experiences with witchcraft are and what your thoughts are on it.
Okay, I feel like I need a whiteboard behind me now. So
right, just like, that meme of Charlie Day with.
Oh, that's 100% what it becomes. So because a lot of people don't even know the difference between Wicca and witchcraft. Where Wicca is the religious practice and witchcraft is the magical practice and the actual creating spells and whatnot. So witchcraft can really go with any religion. Whereas Wicca is more of its own thing. And now this is definitely where my knowledge base kind of disappears, because, I'm not even quite sure if you can because Wiccans can technically worship any pantheon, from what I understand, right? Yes. So, I would say if you're a Wiccan who is working with Thor and a bunch of other deities, then you're still a Wiccan. You're a Wiccan that works with Thor. And again, I'm not big on labels, man, but, obviously I'm pretty solid Norse pagan heathen. I do kind of venture into the Celtic territory sometimes, but to me that becomes, I tend to say Northern spirituality more, because I kind of mess around with the North a lot. I'm starting thinking like, ooh, what are the Russians doing? What were the Irish doing over here? And of course, here in actually Southern Germany was a very big Celtic region, which is something that I've been talking a lot on my channel, because I think it's super fascinating that here in Germany, you have this super intense clash between the Germanic pagans, the Slavic pagans, the Celtic pagans, and then the Romans, and then Christianity. So like there's so many different layers here. It's crazy. But anyways, back to your question. So I would say, you can be a Norse pagan who practices witchcraft. We have many people in the community that do the same. I would almost call them pathways. Like eventually you start getting to a point in your practice that you want to go a little bit further. And so that's when you start looking into things like witchcraft, Sather work, or Druid work. And for me personally, it's been the shamanic practices. So yeah, I would say like, on my whiteboard, my Charlie Day whiteboard, you have paganism as this massive, hodgepodge of things. And then you have, your Wiccans, you have your, Hellenistic pagans, you have your Norse pagans, and then like, the people that are kind of all in the middle. And, so there's a lot going on. And then you can kind of decide, what you branch out from there. If you want to start going back into those other categories, a lot of people tend to do that, where some people are purists, they stay in their one spot, and that's fine. And for me, shamanism, we don't have a book on Northern, Norse pagan specific shamanism. Like, well, there's a couple, but it's not like we get a lot now. Yeah, but it's like a lot of the historical information is very limited if you're just, looking at Scandinavia. So a lot of the shamanic work comes from the Sami people. It comes from the Siberian tribes, nomads. It comes from the Celts. It comes from the Druid as well. And then from Native American shamanism. I mean, this is probably the shamanism we know the most about. And so a lot of modern shamanic traditions come from the native beliefs. But then you also have African shamanism as well, which again is the fascinating thing to me, is the the fact that you have so many different cultures around the world that supposedly never talked to each other in ancient days, and yet we all have very similar shamanic traditions.
Right.
But that's all because they were using, shamanic travel to talk to each other, right? So yeah, I mean, I would definitely say I've even thought about creating a series called Pagan Pathways, talking about the different ways you can go. But I think it's just important, just like the Wicca and witchcraft thing, that you just kind of have to separate what is a religious practice and then what is a pathway that you can kind of go.
Right. Yeah. Well, because in my personal experience, I started with Wicca because in the year 2000, that's what the most information was on, because it spanned from the 1950s all the way to then, and that in that time period there was so many books that were published and more that were coming out each day. So when I started into this path, that is where I started. That's the information that I had, and then I felt it was too structured, but I always kept the witchcraft aspect of it, and then paganism sort of started kind of blending with it too. So in my experience, how I would define that, at least for what I do, is I do hold rituals for honoring my deities. And I also do cast spells where I work with energy towards a certain goal or a certain something that I want to achieve or whatnot. And oftentimes I will have my deities help me, specifically usually Freya, just because she kind of has a hand in magic, but also sometimes Hel, or even Frigg if I'm doing something for my family. But to me they're blended together, and I've been sort of going down the path of Seder and sort of understanding the vulva and all that stuff too, and it's been fascinating to me. But I know that there are many Norse pagans where they don't step into that. It's really just more paganism. And I do love the concept of the different pathways to paganism, because I do think that, again, bringing back to all of baby pagans, when you're stepping into this, it is so overwhelming and you really get caught up in structure more than experience. And I think that it's important to understand that we really have a lot of the driver's seat. And that is something that also drew me to paganism, was knowing that, oh God, I can be in the driver's seat of all of this. And obviously some of it, not completely, but I can determine how I want to see things, and the gods can kind of help me out with that a little bit too. So to me, that was also a draw to witchcraft as well. It's like, okay, if I need to achieve a goal, maybe I can put a little magical oomph in that too. And that to me is empowering.
So you ready for a super nerdy analogy?
Yes.
So, okay, I'm a huge Elder Scrolls guy. So
yes.
Oblivion was my jam. I put like easily hundreds and hundreds of hours into Oblivion. It's better than Skyrim, sue me. Skyrim is still great, but here's the analogy. So in Oblivion, you had to kind of predetermine what class you were going to be. Like you could technically do whatever you wanted, but it would be really hard otherwise. So you had to pick like 7, sword, magic, healing, athletics. You had to kind of pick who you were going to be from the start. But Skyrim changed that, and it became whatever you did, you just became better in. And so if you just use swords all game, yeah, you'd be great in swords, but you wouldn't be great with a bow. But if you decided 20 hours in that you're like, what, I'm going to start using a bow. I mean, you can do that. You just have to start from the beginning and start training it up. And so I think a lot of people look at paganism from this Christian perspective, where you look at it and you have to have this preordained destiny of what you can do. And then, but really it's more that Skyrim system where it's just like, you can focus on Odin like I did for the first year. And it's like basically the only deity I worked in. So, I got a bunch of skill points in the Odin tree. And then, I just decided, if my Freya experience, she made a calling to me, I was like, I'm going to work with Freya. So I've been putting more time and money and experience into my Freya. And it's like, that's kind of how this works in my mind. And from my experience, you're not locked into anything. We don't have, there's no pagan pope. There's no rule book. There's obviously guidelines, and why I think it's important to have community, like we mentioned, because they're the ones that are going to keep you in check, keep you grounded. But at the end of the day, what's the saying in witchcraft? Do as you will, just don't harm others, right?
Yes.
Yeah. And I think that's, a good pagan rule in general as well. Like, we have so many people in the community, which is why I'm so thankful for the community that just practice so many varied and amazing things. One of my greatest friends, Ian, who does the podcast with me, he works with Fenrir, who is usually someone I'm like, hey, like, stay away from, because I'm an Odin guy. Like, why would I want to talk about Fenrir? And yeah, he's one of my best friends, as he does stuff with Fenrir, he does stuff with Hell. And I'm thankful for that, because we have two very different experiences. And I love having conversations with people who I find that I usually get along more with the people who aren't Odin people, because I'm like, like, I know, like, me and Odin, like, we've already done our thing. So I love hearing about other people's experiences.
So you have more to learn from other people's experiences, especially if you haven't branched into that. And I think, again, to kind of wrap it back around to community, that's another really wonderful benefit of community. Again, to bounce ideas off of each other, to have that sort of communal experience. And because, like, this is not structured, and we don't have a doctrine, and I would much prefer that we don't.
Right.
Because I can't be put in that box.
Well, it's like the Pirates Code. It's a guideline.
I was thinking of that. I absolutely adore those movies. So
yeah,
really more like guidelines anyway.
Yeah, I mean, basically, it's like.
All right. Well, I think that's kind of all I had for you today, unless there was anything else that you wanted to discuss.
So
but
can you give an offering in Minecraft?
That is a good question.
No, okay. So let me give some context here. So if you keep up with like all my doings, I did recently an interview with Seeker of Wisdom, or Zach, who's in the UK. And it's funny because both of you had messaged me around the same time to do these interviews. And I just did mine with him 2 days ago before this filming. It's interesting. It's going to be interesting to see who gets these videos out first.
I know.
Yeah, no pressure. But his interview. So if she posts hers first, go to his and watch this as well. So I posed him this question because I got this question once: is, can you give an offering to the gods in Minecraft? So can you give an offering to the gods in Minecraft?
That is a good question. And again, I will say, as a gamer, if I can link my spiritual practice to video games, I'm going to find a way. My biggest offering that I give to the gods is my time. So if I am doing something with intent, and I'm kind of making the intent that that's going to be an offering to them, then to me, I would say that would work, honestly. You could even, oh God, I've even made the joke to my husband about how I wanted to build a temple to the Norse gods in Minecraft or something, you can totally do that. And
I mean, giving your diamond pickaxe into a magma, cube, I mean, that hurts.
It does.
So, this, to me, like the Minecraft, the thing I haven't shared with you before this. So we'll move to the thing that I think is more of a tangible argument, because I think 90% of the people you ask this to, on the street, pagans, so to speak, they'd be like, are you kidding me? Like, why would you even ask such a dumb question? And that's how I felt the first time I heard it too. But the more I started thinking about it, I mean, like, imagine your child comes up and it's just like, Mom, I want to give my diamond pickaxe in Minecraft to Odin. You're going to be like, oh, that's pretty darn cute. Like, that's not like the biggest thing in the world, but it's the thought that counts, kind of thing. And, I have my criticisms, a lot of modern, pagan things in the social media sphere. I'm not a fan of TikTok in any way. I'm not a fan of, these shortening of video links. I mean, obviously this interview is going to be over 30 minutes long. And I think that's the kind of conversations you need to have about the gods. I don't think it's fair to the gods to condense them down to 60 seconds. I don't think it's fair to condense religion down to 60 seconds. You're taking away from religion. It's the same thing with like art, again, here comes my art history, nerd coming in, but I hate, Jackson Pollock, because when you completely destroy form and you just do whatever you want onto a board and then you sell it to me as art, like, no, You are dribbling paint onto a board. You didn't go, you're not doing anything. Okay, now I'm just like, I'm thinking too much about that. I hate Jackson.
I feel the same though. I'm right there with you.
So yeah, as far as yes, the Minecraft thing, I get it. I get why people will snub their nose at it. Again, if it's a kid, I think it's cute. But if you're a 30-year-old man who's like, I'm gonna give my diamond pickaxe to the gods, I'm gonna be like, okay, like let's step it up a little bit. But because at the end of the day, it's you're giving something of value is technically what an offering is. So the next thing I gave Zach is an iPhone. If you gave an iPhone to the gods, because technically it has monetary value and it has personal value to yourself as well, because you do so much on these nowadays. So what if you just like, people went to bogs back in the day and threw in swords? You throw in your iPhone to the gods. Is it an offering? Yes or no? We
could expand on that a little bit though, because I was talking about how time is such a big offering to the gods. So put your phone in airplane mode, and instead of spending your time on your phone, sit with the gods. That is sacrifice. That is an offering.
What you're saying is go outside.
Outside.
No, I honestly, I think one of my favorite offerings, like non-actual, like physical offering, is something that Blade or Babushka in the community shared with me. It was his idea, is giving secrets to Odin. So if you have a secret and you like whisper it into a fire and you never share it with anybody else, I was like, that's kind of a cool offering.
That actually could be a little bit expanded upon too, with a cathartic purpose, or say you are really struggling with something, or having a tough day mentally, you're going through something. If you sit at the altar and speak to them, for me, I particularly like doing this with Hel. She's always been really great about shadow work and kind of exploring that sort of stuff, but to sit and speak to them almost as you would maybe a therapist, and just kind of unload, but then just maybe even go down branches or rabbit holes that you wouldn't kind of with anybody else, that is something that could also be blended into that concept. So I like it.
So I'm like, something that I done, as an Odin person, is anytime I have these spouts of madness, which I feel like it's just a thing that happened with the moment you start going down that Odin path. So because I second guess myself all the time, literally just all the time, and Odin has become that deity that if I'm in that mindset where I don't know what to do, I just literally just like, start talking to him and kind of bang my head against the wall while also kind of calling to him. And like, I don't know if it's necessarily Odin, in the back of my mind guiding my thoughts, but it helps me organize my thoughts when I am going through those moments, because those moments happened before I was a pagan, but now at least I have that deity that I feel helps me through those situations.
Again, it's very cathartic. And I speak a lot on my channel about mental health and kind of combining that with paganism and using it to heal yourself in a lot of ways, because to me, my spiritual practice is deeply tied to my mental health. And I came to paganism trying to make sense of depression and trying to kind of go through all of that. So, I'm kind of glad that we brought that up a little bit too. There's so much that we could discuss there. Maybe a future podcast episode.
Oh yeah, no, I mean, yeah, no, we should do that. Yeah, we've had you on the podcast before. We should really talk about that. Yes. But you still refuse to answer my question: is can you give an iPhone as an offering?
If you really wanted to chuck it into a lake and give it to Odin, I suppose you probably could, honestly.
So Zach's answer was like, try it and find out. Like if you really want to chuck it into the lake, like you find out, my friend. I'm not chucking my $600 or $700 iPhone into a lake.
Yeah, unfortunately, money has kind of got us in its claws.
Right.
So.
Yeah, these things are way too expensive.
Yeah,
it's ridiculous. And but the thing that I left that conversation on, and I'll leave it here too, is the only thing I would say against it, because in technicality, if you look at, pre-Christian Scandinavian Germanic offerings, yes, bending a sword, throwing it into a bog was actually a very common offering because it showed that, no one will use the sword again. And to me, that's the basic idea behind offerings is no human will use that item again. That's what makes it for the gods. And so in technicality, a sword is, something like an iPhone. It's a tool. So if you're saying, throwing this into a bog, so much so, or smash it and say, this is for you, Odin, technically, according to history, I think you are correct. And that would be an offering. However, the only thing I would say against an iPhone as an offering is the fact that it requires so much of the world's like natural resources to make these things, and they're not sustainable in any ways. And we should definitely stop upgrading every year because, it is destroying our planet and promoting slave labor. So maybe don't smash your iPhone, because I think it perpetuates a system that doesn't benefit our planet. But I think it brings up an interesting conversation of, what is an offering. Most people, to many heathens, it will always just be alcohol. That's just what they like giving. It's great. It makes a big explosion when you pour it into fire. And it's cool. Don't get me wrong. It's really cool. And I love it in videos because it looks really dramatic. But, and again, if you watch my channel from the beginning and move on, my offerings have changed along with it. Instead of just alcohol, I've given things like secrets. I've given things like stories. I've dedicated time. I've dedicated research. I've dedicated climbing a mountain. There's so many different things that you can do for the gods. And really all you can do is try it and see what kind of response you get.
Yeah, exactly. And I think we really get caught up on what to offer. I know that I certainly do, but I think that start simple. I mean, kind of figure out something that there's a general consensus of what that deity might like. My first offering to Hel was a apple that I carved Helga's into, and I set it out on my outdoor altar, and nature took it, and that was what I did for her. And my first offering to Freya, I believe, was tea during that fertility ritual that I mentioned. So my first offering to Odin was knowledge. I am just like reading about him.
Yeah.
So, I think that people really get caught up in like, what do I do? And there's that whole like fear of sin popping in again too.
Right. Yeah. Don't worry about that, kids.
Nope.
So I'll share, this can be like my final thought, unless you have anything else.
All right.
So the funniest offering I ever gave. And then again, this is the learning lesson that is paganism, and the importance of having a community so you can share these things. So this is your, Wisdom of Odin, 2 years of, knowledge and paganism, motive for advice for the day. There we go. That was the words I was looking for. Don't leave raw steak outside of your apartment near the woods. So my first offering, like my first outdoor altar, I mean, this is probably 5 years ago, maybe. I was just getting into the faith and I was like, what do the gods want? They want meat. I'll just leave meat for the gods, that's, Viking thing to do. And so I just lived in like a townhome complex. And so I just had like a little wood board outside my garage that had like a bowl in it. And I was just like outside with a candle, just like, I give this steak to you, Odin, and like put the steak in the bowl or whatever. Like, didn't even think about it. And then sure enough, I think it was like 2 or 3 days went by and I went out and there was just like an army of flies and like 5 possums like fighting over the steak. And it smelled horrible and it was like bubbling and it was just getting torn apart and it was disgusting. Like, I mean, I'm not saying I didn't have a good Odin time, but at the same time, I was like, oh my God, I am never leaving raw meat outside of my own house ever again.
Not go well.
Yeah, and I think it rained too, so it was wet, old, raw meat. That was it was disgusting.
I should be careful about that too, because I have kittens and I also have kids, and so my altar is like within climb up on, mess with, or little hand reach. Yeah. And so I don't leave offerings out on my altar. Whenever I am done with my workings, I always take it outside to my outdoor altar, or I pour it. I have an ash tree outside. And so I'll actually usually like walk around in a circle and pour the liquid around the base of the tree. Yeah. So, I mean, I think that's something else that people always forget about, is it's like, don't leave stuff, especially like rotting meat or something that can be harmful. Also be mindful.
I think I like lowered my life by 10 years because I left. It had to have been a month like of like beer in a glass on my altar. And I guess like I was just busy with gatherings or something like that. And then I remember like going to do something at my altar and I saw this like bubbling blue mold in the cup. And I was like, oh, and I like went to go wash it out. And the moment I poured it out, it turned into like just gas. And I was, I was just like, no, like you try to wash it down the drain. Oh yeah, no. You'll have fun with paganism, kids. It's
the learning experiences.
Yeah.
Oh, well, thank you so much for coming on, Jacob. I really appreciate this chat. It's been fun, and it's been awesome to finally have you on my channel and talk about all the things from beer mold to
look, if there's one thing I can guarantee is that you'll never like be bored with the conversation. Like I will tell you about the beer mold, the deepness, like it'll just go up, it'll change all the time.
I still think one of my favorite moments from your channel is when Casey was doing a video and you're just climbing in a tree in the back.
Oh yeah.
And she's like, really?
She had to do so many takes, I was bored. Yeah, no, that was, oh my gosh, that was well over a year ago. But yeah, now I remember filming and like, you know, I was coaching her through it because she wanted to talk about her spiritual experiences. And you know, like she was just sitting there having this deep moment. I'm like, I wonder if I could climb that tree. I'm gonna do
it. just gonna do it while in the frame.
Yeah. That's all I want to be is just be like this weird like Gandalf in the woods when I get older, just like wander around and people like, who's that? And it's like, oh, that's just Jacob, he just wanders in the woods nowadays.
That's a wonderful thing to aspire to. Gandalf is one of my favorite characters ever. And Odin tends to really kind of have that like energy or that persona about him whenever I'm having experiences with Odin. I think that's kind of how he like relates to me. So it's just
yeah, awesome. I describe him as like a slightly grumpier Gandalf.
I don't know. Gandalf was pretty grumpy sometimes.
Yeah, well, I think in the books he's more grumpy than when he is like in the movies. I think he's a little bit happier, but like the book, like the books, I feel like he's definitely got like a chip on his shoulder.
Fool of a took. He's been dealing with the Hobbits bullshit for.
Hey, he like, but again, the thing I like about Gandalf, and you know, in the Lord of the Rings in particular, is the fact that he has such a stressful life, being a wizard and like dealing with these global politics and like these old beings that are just arguing all the time. Where he goes to like kick it and just have a good time is with the hobbits. Like at the end of the day, he likes just smoking old Toby, eating some good food and like talking about stuff. And that's ultimately what I think we're trying to do as pagans, is just smoke some old Toby and eat some good food and talk about stuff.
We should just all aspire to be Gandalf in some shape or form, honestly.
or at least just hobbits.
Or just hobbits. I'm too tall for.
Never heard of hobbits going to war,
I mean, there was the whole war with the trolls. I think.
Well, is that where like the one hobbit like invented golf or whatever?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that was a long time ago.
Oh, I could talk about the connections between Lord of the Rings and paganism all day too, but
oh yeah, no, like I just I'm reading through Fellowship of the Ring again right now, and I just got back to Tom Bombadil. I'm like, Tom Bombadil was dope. Like, why does everyone hate in this guy? Like, he just uses the power of his voice to command the world around him.
And he wasn't even in the movie.
But
the sad part.
He would mess up the tone of the movie so much because the movie is very like serious, I feel like, and then you have Tom Bombadil singing like about everything. Like there's so much singing in Lord of the Rings.
I mean, well, they're singing in the end too, but I was just thinking about Aragorn singing in the end, but that's more of a serious note too.
Yeah, well, that's, I feel like, a personal reason. I mean,
right.
Oh, Vigo.
Okay, all right. Well, you and I could probably talk about Lord of the Rings forever too. But...
Yeah. So we have it down. We need to talk about mental health and Lord of the Rings. Find a way to weave those. Yeah, weave that into one episode.
Tell the boys I'm ready.
All right. Well, thank you so much for having me on.
Of course.
One, I just like talking to people. It's I don't know. Like, I feel like I've been in this for a while now. I mean, again, almost 2 years. I've had so many experiences I haven't shared on camera, so I just love sharing them. But also I just love not editing this video.
Right? Yeah. A lot of it's probably not going to be edited, just to let you know.
That's fine. Yeah. What do you think I do with the podcast? I'm like, yeah, whatever.
It's fine. People get to see you as you are. And I don't edit my videos a lot too. And most people are like, just don't. Like, we like seeing the authentic you. I really should make a gag reel though, because there are many, many times where I start to record and I'm like, hey guys, oh,
I think that like I honestly, like, when I forget when I made the decision that I was just like, anytime I burped on camera, I was like, you know what, I'm just gonna show people, like, I burp, like, whatever, especially if I'm drinking a beer while like talking about something serious. I'm just like, yeah, back in the day during the afterlife, but yeah, then anyway, back to hell, like, I feel like it's like, yeah, I'm just human.
You're just human.
Yeah.
Beer
Gross.
makes us burp.
Yeah, I'm gross, I burp.
All right. Well, thank you so much for coming on, Jacob. I really appreciate it. And it's been a blast chatting with you. Tell the boys I want to go back on the podcast. Yep. I'm ready.
All right. We'll definitely have you back on. But yeah, thank you again so much.
Thank you.